But they are now an independent nation called Kiribati, and it covers an area larger, including the water, larger than the United States. Islands all over the place. Tarawa itself is an atoll. This is the map of Tarawa. An atoll is, I'll give you a real quick geology lesson. Atolls are associated with volcanic islands. And the whole Pacific Ocean is known, and around the outside of the Pacific Ocean is known as the Ring of Fire because of the movement of plates. A lot of volcanoes are popping up along the edges, and Tarawa was one of them. And what happens is the big cinder cone goes up, and it's, I don't know how long they're a million years maybe or whatever. And during that time that the cone is above water, coral is colonizing around the margins. And then a lot of these volcanoes subside. They go away. You can't find them. That's not always the case, but it can be. And what's left is the coral colonies. And that's what Tarawa is. It's the margin of the original volcano. The Japanese came in there in 42 and established a airstrip. This is a part of, there are something like 21 islands maybe in Tarawa. And this one is called Basio. And there's the landing strip. This was taken just before the battle where they did air reconnaissance. And so everything is taking place on that little dinky island, which is half the size of New York Central Park. And yet today 30,000 people live in it. It's a slum. So a couple quick things. It was called Gilbert's. Now it's Kiribati. Looks like Kiribati, but it's pronounced Kiribati. And Basio is the island. Operation Galvanic was what the Marines entitled this invasion. And the 2nd Marines went against 4,800 elite Japanese landing forces called the Rikusentai, in addition to a couple thousand Korean slaves. And unfortunately for the Korean slaves, they didn't want to be there, and they certainly didn't want to fight the Americans. But the Americans couldn't tell the difference between a Korean and a Japanese. And some of the Koreans were forced into fighting anyway, but so there were a lot of Koreans that were killed inadvertently, I guess. This is the battle plan for the invasion. And this was after Guadalcanal. And these guys had fought there for months, and then they went to New Zealand for R&R, and then they came up there in November of 43. And so the volcano itself would have been out in here, and there's an opening into the lagoon right there, and that's where they came through. And here are here's Red Beach 1, 2, 3. Here's Green Beach on the west, Black Beaches on the south. The Japanese were convinced when they started building the fortifications that the enemy was going to attack from the south, come up in there. They put all their big armaments over there. Well, we came in from the north. So they didn't have the same amount of impact that they could have had we done what they thought we were going to do. But anyway, they came in through that opening onto that beach after hours and hours and hours of bombardment and shelling, and they thought they had to have, and it was quiet. When the Marines started going in there, they thought, well, we're just going to be a quick mop-up because we've killed them all. They didn't kill any of them. They were all deep in their cement bunkers and waited until the Marines got in close enough, and then they started taking them out. So it was a real mess. And this was really their first landing invasion in World War II. Guadalcanal didn't count. There was no resistance, and they didn't go in the same way. So anyway, they came in, and unfortunately, and the Marines learned a whole lot off of Tarawa that were not mistakes that were not repeated. They started in, and they were in these LSTs, were kind of heavy, motorized, and they got stuck because the tide was too low. It was a record low. And so many of these guys had to walk 500 yards through water, you can see them here, and interlocking machine gun fire from the Japanese as they came through, and they just killed a bunch of them out there in the water. It's amazing that any of them made it. They did have some Amtraks, and those worked, but we didn't have very many of them. So those were constantly moving wounded out and Marines in and supplies and that sort of thing, but they were very understaffed with Amtraks. Here's when and there's a couple of Amtraks in this picture here and here with their 50 cals up on top, and this is they're coming in over the that beach wall in the midst of the lagoon. This is what it looked like after the battle. You can see the landing strip here. They came in through this way. This is Red Beach 1, 2, 3 right in there. And that's kind of what it looked like after we had won the island. 72 hours for the battle. We lost 1,015 Marines and Navy. A lot of corpsmen were killed in there. A lot of wounded. And the Japanese, almost all of them were killed. Very few, because the Japanese were told, you don't surrender. So they just fought to the end, and I think they might have gotten 20, 30 maybe. One of the bunkers we got into found some bones, turned out to be Japanese, and they had, and it was sake bottles all over the place. So they knew it was over, and they just got themselves plastered, and then they shot themselves with guns. They had a toe and a rifle to set it off. Very sad. So it was a large number of casualties on both sides. After it was over, the bodies were in horrible shape. Not that you could ever have a good one, I guess, but I learned when I got down to Tarawa what an uncomfortable place that is. It never got below the 90s. It was usually up closer to 98. It's not technically South Pacific because it's about 40 miles north of the equator. So it's right on the equator, Central Pacific they call it. Anyway, these bodies, and they couldn't bury them during the 3 days that the battle was going on. So the bodies were all over the place, and then when it was all over with, they went to bury them. They had swollen up, they turned black, and they were in bad shape. And so they had to get them put away really quickly. So here's some of them actually taking stretchers and putting the bodies on with their ponchos usually, and carrying them to the graves. This is in the midst of transport, and it's kind of hard to see on here, but take my word for it. This guy right here is wearing a gas mask, which tells you. And then the Seabees were there. They came in after the war was over, and they brought in their bulldozers, and they did all kinds of things to the island. But to get the bodies put away quickly, since we had that many, they bulldozed these long trenches, usually in groups of 4 to 6. And you can't go very deep because the water table is only about 4 feet deep. So these are shallow sand, it's all sand. And then they would, and this is one of the trenches right there, and then they would come in one at a time. This wasn't any sort of sacred ceremony. They came in and they just dumped them. And they just piled them up along the way, as many as they can get. And they usually got about 40 in a trench somewhere in that area. Since it was so chaotic and so much was going on, they didn't map them very well, where these people were. And in some cases, they didn't even know who it was. They just put the bodies in the ground. They tried to keep records, and there are some, but not as many as you would like to think. And then the Seabees came in and they changed it. They bulldozed everything. Some of the cemeteries got moved. Some of the cemeteries got covered over by construction and other things, and so it was a mess. And of course, the war is still going on, and this is now the U.S. airfield at Tarawa after the Seabees had done their work. So then graves registration came in there after the war, 46, 47, and started digging them up. And I saw a photo. I can't find this. I wish I had been able to put this photo in. I saw a photo down there during graves registration recovering these guys. And here's two Navy guys with their foot up on a fence drinking little Coca-Colas. And the natives are out there with the shovels working while these military are supervising them, you know. And they didn't do a very good job when they did recover them. A lot of them are partials. We got a whole lot of partial burials down there. Some of the body is taken back, the rest was left. Now, in terms of what's remaining on Tarawa, we had all kinds of stuff down there. There's me on my first trip down there, and there's a Sherman Tank out in the lagoon at low tide. And it's still there. I had a lot of my students crawl down inside of it and get all excited. And there's an Amtrak that's on the beach at low tide as well. And there aren't a whole lot of vehicles down there. They've been moved for the most part, but a lot of other structures and things are there. This is the Admirals Bunker. Admiral Shibasaki. And he was very arrogant about the whole thing, and he said, "We are so well fortified," and they were. So well fortified that 1 million people couldn't take this island in 100 years. That was his quote. At 72 hours later, it was gone. This is his bunker. It's a 2-story cement bunker, and you can see the shell holes from the Navy ships in the side of his bunker. He quickly evacuated that, and they used that for their medical treatment at the time. Some of my students crawled up on top just to get a better view. Here's a bunch of the big guns that the Japanese installed over on the other side of the island. These are all British that they picked up Hong Kong or somewhere Singapore, many, many years earlier. And then they brought them down there and they set them in. There must be 5 or 6 of them across the southern edge of the island. These are places where the Japanese stored their ammunition. And they look like Quonset huts. They're subterranean, big holes in the top. The natives use them now as a latrine. So we didn't go in them. Needless to say. This is one of the bunkers, and it's used now. This is set up to be a chicken coop and a pig pen in one of the yards there. And here's another bunker, and you can see the native sleeping here on top of the cement. And the island's just covered with this sort of thing. Up until fairly recently, they've had no sewage down there. They go out into the bunker or go out into the lagoon to take care of themselves. And then in terms of garbage disposal, they didn't have any garbage pickup either. So they would dig holes in their backyards to bury their garbage. And of course, so many bodies across the island, they're constantly hitting these bodies while they're dumping their garbage, and then they throw the bones back in with the garbage in many cases. So you can see some examples of stuff that has been out there. And so there was a real sense of urgency by Mark Noah when he was down there and realized he was running he's a pilot, but he was working on a project using, I think it was a B-26 or something, and he used to take people flying and educate them about World War II. And he got down there and saw this, and it changed his life, and he said, we got to do something about this. And the government wasn't doing anything at that point. So he started the whole project of recovery there. This, I told you that some of them didn't fully recover all the bodies, they just got part of them. Here's one of a young guy with a Marine Corps ring on his finger, and it's just the forearm. We found a couple of those. One of them, when we looked at the age of the individual, he was about 15 years old. And he had that same sort of thing. I think the one he had a bracelet with his name on it, a gold bracelet. Here's another one that was recovered, and here's the skull is gone, the lower portion of the body is gone, but all the rest of the body was left behind by the recovering people. Here's an old map that they did of Basio, and History Flight got in there and tried to find where the cemeteries were. There were over 30 cemeteries across that island. And so they started working. You can't use metal detectors down there because it's jillions of pounds of shrapnel and everything. So it doesn't work. But you can use ground penetrating radar, which we did. This is an example. This is Cemetery 33. And this is an air photo of Basio shortly after the battle, after they had built these cemeteries. And I was really kind of irritated, disgusted to find out that a lot of these cemeteries were set up for people to come in and see how they were treated, and they were phony cemeteries, a number of them. They had crosses and sand and borders, and there was nobody in them. Nobody in them. It just irritates it, you know, again, our government. But this one was an air photo, and it looked like they had, these are the 4 trenches here. All the trenches across the island were buried going east-west, regardless of where they were. So that's north above. And this is a plot where we're going to do some ground penetrating radar. And there's what the island looks like now with the superimposition of those trenches right here, right in the midst of the houses. I don't know how many houses we picked up and moved while we were down there. These are most of them huts on poles, you know, and the big old husky native guys that helped us and just pick them up, move them 50 feet or 30 feet, and then we dig, and then they move the house back. Crazy. But anyway, that's right in the middle of a neighborhood. This is a big Catholic church right there. And here's the results of the ground penetrating radar. With the color where it says, where it shows red, that's a disturbance that we would then go in and check and think, you know, hopefully that would be a body. You can't see bodies in ground penetrating radar, but you can tell where the ground's been churned up. So that's just an example of it. Here's one of the really fabulous successes. I mean, they have a lot of them down there, but this one is pretty neat. I know one of the family members. His name was Sandy Bonnieman. He was a Marine lieutenant, and he received the Medal of Honor posthumously. He came from a very well-to-do family in Knoxville, Tennessee. His family owned a lot of things. He went out and was working a mine out in Arizona with his family, had 3 kids, and when Pearl Harbor came, he quit managing the mine and joined the Army as a private, or joined the Marines as a private. And he went off and he fought in Guadalcanal and got a battlefield commission to 2nd lieutenant as a combat engineer. And then they got on to Tarawa, and on the 3rd day of the battle, there was this bunker. It's all sand covered. And this bunker was really creating a problem for him getting inland. And so Bonnieman led a squad up onto the bunker. This is afterwards, where these Marines are all up across the top. But before that happened, he led them up there. And in the process was killed. And so then he was one of 4 people that got the Medal of Honor down there. Only one of them lived. And I imagine there could have been a whole lot of them on that first day that should have deserved the Medal of Honor. But nobody was there to witness them. They were all killed, you know, and nobody else saw it. This is the Bonnieman bunker today. Big 2-story that's covered with sand. That's what would have been over the top of that, with a little doorway over there on the side. It's backyard of the police station there now, and they store all kinds of crap back in that. So over the next 70 years, their family had no idea where he was and what had happened to him. And his father finally put a headstone up that said "buried at sea." And then 72 years later, they found him. This is a map of the area where the trench came. This is cemetery 27, and this is the trench that they found, and each of those oblong objects are burials. There's bodies stacked in there. And you might notice over here, the dark colored, that's a building. And it went under the building. Oh, and unfortunately, this one you couldn't pick up and move. So anyway, they when they started going through it, and we find, not always, but find dog tags and things like that, so we can identify some of the people at least. And they did have a record of this particular trench, and they knew the names in the order that they were put in there, apparently. And Clay Bonnieman Evans, who's a journalist out of Niwot and used to do a lot of writing for the Boulder Daily Camera, now lives back on the East Coast. But he is his grandfather, and had been involved for quite a while up to this point with History Flight trying to find him. So when this trench was identified and they knew that Bonnieman was down here a certain way, they called Clay and they said, "Come on down, because I think we're about to find your grandfather." So he came, and he was there the day that his grandfather was found. This is the building. And it happens to be where History Flight has their own lab and office right now in the back part of that building. The trench was running right along here. You can see the wall of the foundation right there. I'll show you a little better picture of it in a moment. There's a big parking lot, and the trench ran all the way across there. This is what a trench looks like in cross-section, where it hits the cement block foundation. You can see that dark depression there. That's they had identified it, and they had already recovered all the bodies up to that point. Here is a little bit deeper, same place, and you can see the Marine with his boots on, face down, right at the edge of the building. So now what do we do about the rest of them that go underneath the building? The department, this is all done under the auspices of the Department of Defense. And today it's known as a Defense POW MIA accounting agency. Back in those days it was called JPAC. A lot of scandals with JPAC, and they dissolved it. Typical government thing. Everybody stayed. They just put a new name on it. But so DPAA is in charge now. But they went to them and they said, you know, we know we've got maybe another 8, 10 bodies underneath this building. We want to knock the building down. And they said, no way. You're not knocking that down. It's probably outside of that big Catholic church, probably the biggest building on the island. So they had to figure out something else to do. So they ordered a bunch of big construction jacks out of San Diego, and it took about 2 months to get them down there. But here they are in place as they're cranking up to support the foundation so they can get underneath. You can see all of those are under the building as they were supporting them. And here's one of the bodies, body 43, and one of our archaeologists is standing on that little wooden narrow beam, documenting it with a photograph of that particular body, and it was all recorded. You can see somebody's feet in the background down underneath. This is inside that big building. This is the labs for History Flight. And some of the bodies that were brought out, notice this one is covered with a poncho. I tried to get them out intact without, which is tough. Normally you dig a body, you remove the bones element by element, and we had to do that sometime. But they tried to get since it's fairly soft sand, try to get a plywood board up underneath it and just recover it together, and then comes out a little more intact. So this is a map of the portion of that trench where Bonnieman was found. Notice several of these have, here's got a K-bar knife, and got lots of hand grenades and other items along with some of these. And here's Bonnieman. By the way, that little number 1 on there, after he was found and removed, because they didn't let Clay dig his grandfather, and he didn't want to. But after it was all done and he was pulled out, he went in there and started poking around, and he found his grandfather's cigarette lighter with his name engraved on it. So that's what that number 1 is. It was in his pocket right there. So anyway, the point I was trying to make is that a lot of these, in the midst of a battle, you run low on ammunition and water or whatever, and they would take from the bodies that are out there and try to resupply if they could. And a lot of these bodies that they have in there were not touched. And my suspicion was those were guys killed on the first day, and now we're well after the 3rd day, and they didn't want to get near that. But Bonnieman was killed on the 3rd day, and notice he's got nothing except his boots. They took everything there because he wasn't swollen and black. This is him as he was exposed. You can see another guy here. Back up one here. This guy right here is named Fay Moore, F-A-E, Fay Moore, from Chadron, Nebraska. That's where I went to college. And he's got quite a story. And they buried him a couple years ago up there in Chadron. And I'll get back to Fay a little bit later. But anyway, this is Bonnieman as he is exposed, ready to be exhumed. They knew it was him right away when they saw the gold teeth, because he was an old guy. Most of these guys, 18, 20 years old, they didn't have gold teeth. They couldn't afford them anyway, probably, but he could. And so when they saw the gold teeth, they said, "We got him. And you have to get anything else." He was brought back to Knoxville and buried in the family cemetery. This is his daughter, and this is Clay Bonnieman Jr., or Evans, the guy, the journalist, sitting there in the front row with the family as she's been given the flag that draped the coffin. This is Clay himself. This is he was down in Tarawa, and he's leaning up against the Bonnieman Bunker. Really neat guy. And he wrote this book, and it is an amazing documentation of his grandfather and what led up to the Battle of Tarawa, his whole life biography, and then what happened after he was killed, and the whole recovery process and bringing it right up to present day. So it's a really interesting book. I've mentioned Fay Moore, guy that was buried right next to Bonnieman. He was among 1,000 Marines who married New Zealand women during the R&R down there. All the New Zealand guys were all off fighting over in Europe somewhere, and as they say about the Americans when they were over in England, and I suppose that fit for Tarawa as well, overpaid, oversexed, and over here. So anyway, about 1,000 of them got married down there. And Fay was became engaged to a young Kiwi lady named Jill Hudson. So they didn't get married, but they were about to be. This one of my students digging in this particular trench. It was a different graves cemetery, and she's working on a human ulna right here. And this is a cemetery that had already been scraped out, but we were getting lots of bone in there. It's all messed up. You couldn't identify individual burials anymore, but just bones all over the place. And so she's cleaning off that ulna, and what she found as well was this. And it's a little medallion about that big that you have on a chain. And it's a Maori are the natives of New Zealand. And this is a Maori tiki god that was made, probably not used by the Maori, but by the New Zealand people who sort of, appreciated Maori art. And so we found that medallion in this grave, pretty close to where that bone is. And look at what it says on the back. Can you read it?
Love something.
Love.
Love Babs.
Bastard? No, I didn't love that.
Babs. B-A-B-S. So some woman named Babs in New Zealand gave this to Fay Moore. So I'm, no, I shouldn't say Fay Moore. No, I'm getting confused here. Fay Moore lost, he had a girlfriend there, but some other Marine was attached, whether married or engaged, to a New Zealand woman named Babs. And he died, and she never saw him again. And that was, I got very involved mentally with this whole thing. I'm trying to write a novel called Love Babs, where I'm struggling. I got a great opening chapter and a great closing chapter, and all the stuff in the middle is not going well. Only been working on it about 4 years now. Anyway, so History Flight has found more than 200 in Tarawa, and they go out to Pearl Harbor, and the DPAA has an office in Pearl Harbor. I had to go out there for certification a few years ago. So these are the bodies that they have returned. Here's on the day, about every 3-4 months, the DPAA would fly in with a C-130 or something, and they'd pick up whatever we had. So this is one of the, you can only see one coffin there, but there were about 8 of them leading between there and the back of the plane. And that's our crew and the native crew. And this is my very first trip down there, and I retired from college teaching in 2016, and I grabbed these 5 students of mine and took them with me, and we went down there and got involved, and that's when we first got involved with History Flight. And that's us on the upper left when we were in DII getting ready to leave, and at the bottom we're taking off from Bonriki International Airport. Sounds a lot more fancy than it really is. So, I've got enough time here. I think I can get through these. So, in addition to that, and I've been down there 6 times, and we started getting calls about plane crashes in Europe, and so we got involved in that. This is an A-26 light bomber, and by the way, every time we dig a plane, I try to build a model of that plane. And so I brought 2 models along. I got an A-26 over here and a P-47. So you're free to come up afterwards and fondle them if you'd like. Anyway, in this particular picture here on the left is an A-26 missing its wing, and it came out of the same formation. It wasn't the plane that we dug, but it came out of the same formation that same day in Western Germany. This was a 3-man crew. The pilot, Lieutenant Lynn Hadfield from Salt Lake City, and John Kalusich and Hamilton. They're the gunners and bombardiers. And they were flying out of France, and they were shot down on their very first mission. And they never even got to unload the bombs, as far as I know. Here's where it's located, over in West Germany, very close to the Netherlands. This is our crew, the very beginning. Oh, I got a call from History Flight in August of 2016, and they said, we're going to be digging a plane crash in Germany. Can you put a team together? And I said, sure. And I got a hold of 5 or 6 students, and they were all set to go. And the time passed, and it passed. And if you're in the military, hurry up and wait. We finally got the call to go in November, after they'd had their first snow. And so we went over, and we had to put up with a lot of stuff we didn't put up with in Tarawa, in terms of frozen ground. We had to thaw out the ground, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, that's us just as we're ready to begin. They found the spot. This is a horse barn, and they went and did ground penetrating radar, and they found that disturbance area out in an area that they were about to turn into a horse arena. And so they told that's what forced them finally to do this, because they said, if you aren't in here by the first of the year, you can't get in, because we're going to turn that into a fancy horse arena. So they said, okay. There's a farm that's about a mile south of there, and on the night this plane was shot down, a father and a son watched it crash. And he was 6 years old, and he came over while we were there, and he kind of described that night and all of that happened. So we knew we were in pretty much in the right place. So here we are setting up, have a big tent in the background we were using a lot. Here's part of the excavation. Two of my kids doing their first unit. And we screened everything. Most of the bones that we find are on a screen. They aren't nicely in. You do archaeology, you're supposed to, carefully expose it and map it in place and all that. We don't have time for that. We wanted to get the bones. We know we don't have to map the event. We know what happened, but we need to get the bones. So we're shoveling. Almost all the bones we get are on the screens. A few cases there weren't. And these bones are in horrible shape. Unlike the Marines shot in Tarawa, who are put as an entire body into a grave, here's a plane that's going 400 miles an hour straight into the ground, like a lawn dart, and everything gets shattered. So it's their mess. It's a very different kind of thing. This is that crash crater after it was finished. We were all done with it, and that's how far down we went. That's down about 8 or 9 feet to the bottom. This is our crew near the end. This is the crash crater. Nice symmetrical crater. I did a map here, a geological map of that. Unfortunately, the Luftwaffe were really short on metal. So anytime a plane would go down, the Luftwaffe would show up right away with bulldozers and other stuff, and they'd try to recover as much as they could in terms of ammunition and metal that they could use for construction and so forth. So they churned this whole thing. That isn't the way the actual crater probably looked. I'm sure it didn't, because of the way they had disturbed it. But they left the stuff behind. Here's some of the stuff that we found on the screen. There's all 50 caliber shells and cartridges. There's a whole bucket of 50 caliber. We got jillions of 50 caliber. This is a lot of the craft wreckage. We found Lieutenant Hadfield's wings. We also got his dog tags and Kalush's dog tags, and the other guy had left his in his locker in France, which we knew, so we only got 2 of them. This was one of the more interesting things, and I didn't know anything about airplanes at all, and much about, certainly not World War II. We got hundreds and hundreds of these little squares, and they're about that big. And they're thin, steel or iron, I don't know what, rusted. And turns out that they're part of armored vest that the pilots and crew would use, and you can see where these have slots, I guess, and all those things just slotted down in those pockets. And they could wear them in the airplane in case they got hit with shrapnel or something like that. That's what it looked like on a pilot. These are most of the bones we found. Doesn't look like a whole lot for 3 guys. We did get a few others, but and that's what a typical assemblage looks like.
Would there be enough DNA?
Yes, that's how it's all done. All of them. they get the nearest relative they can, and then they get a DNA sample from them, and it takes about 2 years from the time the body is. I get a hold of the family right away, and they say, "We think we've found your relative." So who's the closest relative? And they got DNA, and then they do it, and they come back every time they get them. They know who they are. One of the interesting things about the DNA that I hadn't realized, we were digging all these trenches that had already been recovered in the 40s and just getting fragments here and there. And I thought, well, what's the use of this? And I find out later, when I got out to Pearl, they were telling us, a lot of the bodies were unidentified and were put in the punch bowl, which is out in Hawaii, on Oahu. And they had some kind of chemical put on them, and it had destroyed the DNA. And so these guys had taken our fragment bones. In many cases, they could refit them onto bones coming out of the punch bowl. And so they were able to identify some that otherwise DNA wasn't going to work with. Anyway, so we went out to the funeral for Hadfield out in Salt Lake City. That's one of my students. In fact, she's getting married up in Cody next month, and my wife and I are going up for the wedding. This is Lieutenant Hadfield's daughter, Mary Ann. He had 2 children. Only one was still living. And there she is when she was a baby in his arms. She never knew him. I think he was gone before she was 2. So it was sad in that way. Okay, one other quick little project here. This one is a P-47, and it was right near the end of the war, April of '45. And the Germans had a big landing field near an airport south of Berlin. And so they brought in a couple P-47s, including the one that we dug. And they were strafing the parking lot, trying to knock out the planes that were there. It's located over there. You can see the red, and then Berlin is right above it. And so they came through there 3 times, and on the 3rd strafing run, Lieutenant Horrigan, the pilot of this plane, was struck and crashed, and the other pilot reported that crash when he got back. This is Richard Horrigan before he was shot down. He's standing in front of his P-47 on the left. Well, pilots loved these P-47s because they were really tough, and they were not the most I don't know what the term I want to use. Yeah, they couldn't do they couldn't dogfights and all that kind of thing. Probably not very good, but they're good. They were tough. And here he's standing on the right there with his head through a hole in a flap, and he's smiling about it. He got back home with that kind of damage to the plane. And then, and here's a picture of he and his wife, from West Virginia. And when this picture was taken, she was pregnant. And he left before his child was born. So he never saw his son. So this is the project we went into, and this is all magnetometer work out here in this big field. And all the black indicate where there's a lot of metal of some kind. So we did a lot of work there. We worked there 6 weeks. Finally got into this, hit this area right here, and this is a test trench. And right here is the nose of the plane. Fairly shallow, about 1 meter down. All of the white you see in here is aircraft aluminum. So we knew we were on it right off the bat. So then we started expanding. Here's a little farther back on that wall with the geologic map at the top, and then the cross section here. This is undisturbed here, so the crater actually went down like that right there. This is expanded out to a complete 4 meter by 4 meter square, and you can see a lot of the plane here. Here's a bent prop. And then there's a lot of junk in here. The farmer, this was in the middle of the farmer's road, and he hated this crash crater. After the war, He went in and he pushed everything he could in there to fill it up again. So we got a car wheel, nothing to do with this. Is a bomber door from a German bomber. And there were 200 pounds of horse bones, butchered horse bones in there, which really irritated me because the DPA requires that every single bone we find is labeled and marked. And I said to him, it's not human. Too bad. So I spent days and days and days bagging and labeling each little stupid bag of horse bones, thanks to that farmer. This is a plan view of that crash crater, the entire one. There's the German bomber door. Here's a prop. Here's a prop. Found a part of the body here and up here, and this is a remnant of a wing. And when we saw that, you can see that dark shadow down there. Thought it was a wing. Got down into it, and the kids found this. I don't know, a stainless steel or something. It's a shroud for a 50 caliber barrel. They had 8 50 cals in the wings, 4 on each side. And so there was a shroud sitting in there. It has to be the wing. This is what we found from Horrigan. That is one of the receivers. On the right is his oxygen mask and microphone in place. And here is the first bone we found of him in place. That's part of his left jaw. And by the time we finished, this is what we got. This is what's left of Richard Horrigan. Now, to me, it was interesting. He was 24 years old. This is his collarbone right here. And this end right here is supposed to attach to your sternum, your breastbone. And that's one of the last bones in the body to seal up and quit growing. You know, you start getting older and older, and different bones are through growing early on, and they don't all end at the same time. This is one of the last ones that fuses, quits growing. And around 24 would fit still. And then next to that is an unerupted wisdom tooth. So he hadn't got all of his teeth yet either. So we were pretty sure, you know, we didn't get a single ID off of him at all, though. It all had to be done with DNA. We were sure it was the plane and everything, but nothing definitive like getting that dog tag. That's the kicker. This is what that project area looked like near the end. Here's the crash crater down here. There's this big farmer's field with a lot of the exploratory pits we put in. We found 5 50 caliber machine guns and a bomb crater up there. But most of the other was not a whole lot of stuff. He came right down there. And so that was what it looked like.
What does the local population think of all the effort you guys have done?
It is amazing. Both here, both in Germany and in France. There are all kinds of World War II historians over there, amateurs, who just love to track down, and they were very helpful, especially in France. And in France, on top of everything, we were about an hour drive inland from the beaches in Normandy, where we worked a plane there. I'm not going to show you that one, but the local French guys that came out and worked with us erected a flagpole, and every day by the time we got to the site, they had the American flag flying on top of this pole every day. And I thought the French didn't like us. These guys loved us. The farmer brought us in. They brought us food and champagne every afternoon, and had us over for a big dinner at his farmhouse. And they were and very much appreciated what America did. And we didn't make any public announcement on the finding of the guy in France until the last day. And after we left the last day, we went down through the town of Briouze. And on the wall, on a little message board, sort of like the one you have out front here, in French, somebody had to interpret it for us, but it said, "American aviator found." And they put it on that board. So they were definitely engaged with that. This is last picture of the whole project area near the end, a drone photo. The crash crater's right here. And then you see all the dirt when we did all the screening all around it. That was our team over there. We were working 6 crashes at the same time. I only did this one. But they were all over Bavaria and up into Belgium. And this is Lieutenant Horrigan's son, who is now a retired physician from San Francisco. And he came to the funeral, and they're giving him the flag for his father's coffin. I got to visit with him for about an hour one day, and very nice man. And he had a million questions, which I was glad to answer. So that's it. I'd have to say that it's been a real honor for me to be able to get involved in work like this. It's meant so much to me, and especially to see how it has impacted the families. I feel very lucky. Near the end of my career, I've been able to do something that really helps other people rather than just academic research. So that's pretty neat stuff. I love it. Yes, I'm glad to answer any questions you have. Yeah.
How do you get the funding for all this?
Good question, and it's a problem. You'd think that the federal government, as much money as they waste on stuff, that they would cover everything. They cover room and board, and that's it, as far as I know. I was never involved with any of the financial stuff, but when History Flight first got started, Mark Noah had a friend with deep pockets, and he covered everything. And this went on for years, and finally he pulled the plug. And so now they're out struggling. They're trying to get donations and that sort of thing. And I'm part of another group now called Terra Search that does the same thing. And they haven't been able to get enough. In fact, we turned out the project crashed, but we were supposed to go over Sicily this year. And he couldn't get enough money. He asked me if I could pay my own flight over and back, which I was willing to do, but it didn't turn out. Anyway, the financial thing is a real problem, and they're taking advantage. I think the feds are taking advantage of. A lot of colleges do this sort of thing. They take but they usually only do it one time. It takes a while to get used to this kind of work, and not everybody is cut out for it. And we got the system down pretty well, but they won't pay for everything. So, that's the way I go. And it's very expensive, I'm sure.
A lot of questions, but go ahead. On Tarawa, you had a picture of the grave, one of the graves of the Marine with a lot of hand grenades.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the disposal of that?
Good question. We had an EOD guy always there. Yeah, and we got into one bunker where there were something like 20 16-inch shells. They'd been stacked up. I don't know if they're going to use it on that big gun from Britain or whatever, and we got the heck out of there. And the EOD came in and they took it all up to a northern island of Tarawa that's uninhabited. And they had set up a munitions disposal thing up there. And they had been pretty successful. And then I found out on that particular one, they went into cutting open one of those shells and it blew up. But they were behind sandbags, so they didn't get hurt. But yeah, so EOD is always going to be around.
What do they do for drinking water there? And
What Tarawa does for drinking water?
They had any kind of economy there? I mean, the place looks like a mess.
It is. It's a slum. We had running water. We stayed in a lodge there. Actually, we ate well, and we had plenty of water. I don't know how the natives get it. You certainly can't drink any well water there. Australia and New Zealand are very involved with Tarawa. Things have changed, though, since I was over there. Taiwan had they were granted the monopoly on fishing in the Kiribati Republic, which didn't make the Chinese very happy.
Good.
And this went on for a number of years, and now they got a new political system in there, a new political leader. And Taiwan's got kicked out, and China has taken over, and it has created some logistics problems for people in there recovering now. Go
They've been
figure.
investing into the Solomon Islands, too.
Oh, they're going everywhere. Yeah, look out.
You said you found Japanese bones. Is the Japanese any interest in that?
No. We did have, I think we had in the lab at one point, maybe 15 or 16 that we were pretty sure were Japanese. And they got a hold of the embassy in Fiji and asked them if they were interested. And this guy came over. He brought a Fiji woman who was their secretary or something. And I had the bones laid out in the lab, and he walked around and he looked and he took a few notes here and there. And the Fiji secretary started crying. He didn't. And they do not repatriate their bones. And he said, well, I'll get back to you. Never heard from him again. So I don't know what they're going to do with those Japanese bones. Maybe rebury them somewhere. So, yeah, good question. They don't care.
Will you be going back on June 6th?
To Normandy? Oh, to Europe. No, since COVID, I haven't done anything. So I don't know if I'll ever get to do any more work. I mean, I'm 77 and I got a knee problem.
Big anniversary.
Huh?
That's the big anniversary.
I know it is. I know.
Past that.
I know. Anything else?
Well, one thing I was just going to point out is, at the same time where the Marines, 2nd Marines, were tied up in Tarawa, 27th Infantry Division was attacking the atoll of Megan, which was just north of this. Fortunately, they only encountered about 300 Japanese soldiers, naval soldiers. And
Not 4,000.
so not 4,000. So they were able to finish that off fairly quickly. But again, the 27th then continued up through the Marshall Islands into Saipan, and the rest of it just the same as the Marines. But when we think of the Gilbert Islands operation, we obviously remember Tarawa.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep asking questions, but I
Oh,
want to
okay.
give you one of our
Oh.
little challenge
Well,
coins
thank you very
to
much.
recognize that it was a fascinating talk.
Very nice. Very nice. Feel free to come up and look at the models if you're interested.
That was fascinating.
That would be true, and everything else.
Oh, do you, okay, Fred?
Yeah, I just want to announce, we have Lou Roman in the back, and Lou Roman has an education committee, and the museum has a speakers bureau. So there is a wide variety of historian authors who would like to come to your organization to speak on behalf of the museum. Anything from a 30-minute to a 50-minute or 2-hour session. Your community service organization, school, church, charity, retirement home. So I have a sign-up sheet. We can arrange that, and it's all, of course, free of charge. And I am especially grateful to have met you. We're car show people, and tomorrow you're at Boulder at Hazel Liquor. There's a car show, so I'm going to go down there. But Steve has a beautiful 1947 Chevy Woody. And that's how we met over his vehicle.
Bought it when I was 19,
He paid $95.
and I paid Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And again, we will have hot dogs available if